Denis Locorriere was more than just a singer. He was a voice that carried emotion through generations. As the legendary lead singer of Dr. Hook, he gave the world timeless songs like Sylvia's Mother and Sexy Eyes. Even though kidney disease took him away, his music will forever echo in the hearts of millions. Clarence Carter proved that true vision comes from the soul, not the eyes. Born blind, he still managed to touch millions with his powerful voice and unforgettable songs like Patches and Strokin'. His journey was not just about music. It was about courage, passion, and never letting darkness stop the light within. Claudine Longet lived a life filled with beauty, fame, and tragedy. The French singer and actress captured hearts with her gentle charm and unforgettable presence in films and music. Though her life was surrounded by controversy, many still remember the softness in her voice and the elegance she brought to the screen. Joni Lamb dedicated her life to faith, hope, and inspiring others through television. As the co-founder of Daystar and host of Joni's Table Talk, she became a familiar face for countless families seeking comfort and spirituality. Her passing leaves behind a silence that many viewers will deeply feel. Aleta Mitchell spent her life bringing stories to life on stage and screen. From Broadway to television classics like Law & Order and The Cosby Show, she carried grace, strength, and authenticity in every role. Her talent may have faded from the spotlight, but never from memory. Tom Kane was the voice behind many childhood memories. From Professor Utonium in The Powerpuff Girls to the legendary voice of Yoda in Star Wars, his words shaped the imaginations of an entire generation. Though a stroke took his life, his voice will continue to live in every fan's heart forever. Anne Robinson became an unforgettable face in science fiction history through The War of the Worlds. She represented fear, survival, and strength during one of cinema's most iconic alien invasions. Even decades later, audiences still remember the emotion she brought to the screen. James Robison devoted his life to spreading faith, guidance, and hope. Through his ministry and television programs, he became a comforting voice for families around the world. His legacy is not only built on sermons, but on the lives he inspired. Kenny Jerry, known online as Patriotic Kenny, reminded millions to stay positive even during life's hardest moments. Despite battling lung cancer, he continued spreading smiles and motivation across social media. More than an influencer, he became a symbol of kindness and patriotism. Greg Harmon brought joy to countless children through the creation of the iconic Tickle Me Elmo toy. What started as a simple invention turned into one of the biggest toy crazes in history. Behind the laughter of millions of children was a creative mind that changed childhood forever. Barney Frank spent decades fighting for civil rights and equality. Known for his fearless honesty and determination, he became one of the most influential voices in American politics. His work shaped history, and his courage inspired countless people to stand proudly as themselves. Totola Momposina carried the soul of Colombian culture through her music. Known as the Queen of Cumbia, she introduced Afro-Colombian rhythms to the world and kept her traditions alive through every performance. Her voice was not just music. It was the heartbeat of a culture. This week also brought unimaginable pain to the community of the Islamic Center of San Diego, where Amin Abdullah, Mansour Kaziha, and Nader Awad lost their lives in a tragic shooting. Their loss is not just a headline. It is a wound carried by families, friends, and an entire community mourning together. Some people leave quietly, but the memories they create become immortal, and tonight, the world feels a little heavier without them. Denis Locorriere's career deserves more than a passing mention, because he helped define the sound of soft rock and country pop storytelling in the 1970s. Dr. Hook did not become beloved only because the songs were catchy. They became unforgettable because Denis sang them with a strange mix of warmth, heartbreak, and honesty. He had a voice that could sound playful one moment and deeply wounded the next, and that emotional range gave the band its soul. Even when the group crossed from novelty hits into more serious ballads, Denis kept the performance human and believable. He was the kind of singer who made listeners feel as though he was singing directly to them, about their own lives, their own losses, and their own memories. That is why his songs continued to travel across generations long after the charts changed and the music industry moved on. His passing closes a remarkable chapter in classic rock. but the records, the live performances, and the emotional force of his voice remain. Clarence Carter built his legacy the hard way, through discipline, resilience, and pure talent. Blind from birth, he learned early that success would not be handed to him, so he developed a style that depended on feeling, timing, and emotional truth. His music came out of the deep tradition of Southern soul and blues, where a great singer does not simply perform words, but lives inside them. Clarence's recordings carried grit and tenderness at the same time, which is why audiences connected so strongly with his work. Patches became especially powerful because it told a story many people could recognize. Hardship, responsibility, and the struggle to keep going when life becomes unbearable. Beyond the hits, he helped expand what soul music could sound like, blending raw honesty with memorable melodies. He stood as proof that disability does not erase greatness. In fact, he turned adversity into identity, and identity into art. His career remains a reminder that the most moving voices often come from people who have survived the most. Claudine Longet's life moved through several different worlds at once: music, film, celebrity culture, and public scrutiny. In the 1960s, she became known for a soft and graceful image that fit perfectly into the era's glamorous entertainment scene. Audiences were drawn to her because she seemed delicate, elegant, and quietly mysterious. She recorded songs that matched that image, and her screen appearances added another layer to her public identity. Her marriage to Andy Williams placed her inside one of the most visible entertainment circles of the time, which increased both her fame and the pressure around her. Later, her name became tied to tragedy and legal controversy, and that chapter often overshadowed the rest of her story. But a full picture of Claudine Longet should also include the artist she was before headlines took over. She represented a very particular kind of mid-century celebrity, admired, photographed, talked about, and constantly interpreted by others. Her legacy remains complex because her life was complex, and that complexity is part of what still keeps people looking back at her story. Joni Lamb's place in television was built on faith, consistency, and a deeply personal connection with viewers. She was not simply a broadcaster speaking into a camera. She became part of daily life for people who depended on her for encouragement, reflection, and spiritual comfort. Through Daystar, she helped create a network that gave Christian audiences a shared space for worship, conversation, testimony, and teaching. Joni's table talk became especially meaningful because it felt intimate, like a conversation rather than a performance. That was part of her strength. She understood how to make television feel warm and human, even when discussing serious subjects. Her work mattered because many people looked to religious media during moments of fear, grief, or uncertainty, and she offered a calm presence in those moments. Over time, her influence grew beyond one show or one channel. She helped shape a style of faith-based broadcasting that was personal, accessible, and emotionally reassuring. Her passing leaves behind not only a professional legacy, but also countless viewers who felt seen and comforted by her voice. Alita Mitchell's career is a reminder that some artists shape culture quietly, with steady excellence instead of loud fame. She worked across stage and screen, moving from Broadway to television and film with remarkable ease. Performing in the original Broadway production of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom placed her inside one of August Wilson's most important theatrical works, and that alone marks her as part of a major artistic legacy. Stage acting demands discipline, presence, and emotional control, and Alita clearly possessed all of it. On television and in film, she continued to build a reputation for reliability and truthfulness in her roles. Whether the audience remembers her from The Cosby Show, Law and Order, or Malcolm X, the common thread is the same. She brought dignity to every appearance. Not every great performer becomes a household name, but many still leave a lasting impact on the craft itself. Alita was one of those performers. Her life reminds us that the arts are built not only by stars, but also by the gifted professionals who keep stories alive from one generation to the next. Tom Kane lived in the invisible but powerful world of voice acting, where a single voice can create entire childhoods. That is exactly what he did. For years, his work gave personality to animated heroes, wise mentors, comic characters, and unforgettable figures from pop culture. As Professor Utonium in the Powerpuff Girls, he helped shape one of the most beloved cartoon families of its time. His voice as Yoda and his narration in The Clone Wars connected him to the enormous Star Wars universe, where even a few spoken lines can become iconic. He also worked in projects like Archer, Kim Possible, and Shrek, proving that his talent was not limited to one genre or audience. Voice actors often remain unseen, but their influence is huge because they live in memory every time a fan hears a familiar line. Tom Kane was one of those rare performers whose delivery could make a character feel wise, funny, strange, or comforting. His passing is especially emotional because his work was woven into the daily imagination of so many people. Anne Robinson's career may have been centered on one classic film, but that film became enough to make her unforgettable. In The War of the Worlds, she represented the terror and resilience of ordinary people facing extraordinary danger. Science fiction often works best when viewers can see themselves inside the story, and Anne gave that story a human center. She made fear believable, survival urgent, and emotion real. That is part of why the film remained important for so long. Beyond that iconic performance, she also appeared in television shows that kept her visible to later audiences and helped extend her career across changing eras of entertainment. Her presence belongs to the golden age of science fiction, when practical effects, imagination, and strong performances carried the genre. Even decades later, people still remember her as part of a landmark cinematic moment. Some actors become famous for many roles. Others become immortal through one unforgettable one. Anne was in the second category, and there is no shame in that. Great cinema often needs one perfect performance to ensure that a face is never forgotten. James Robison spent his life speaking to people who were searching for hope. Through ministry, preaching, writing, and television, he built a career around encouragement and moral guidance. His work was not entertainment in the usual sense. It was spiritual communication, aimed at healing hearts and strengthening families. As the founder of Life Outreach International and a co-host of Life Today, he became a trusted voice for many viewers who wanted faith to feel practical and present in everyday life. He also wrote extensively, which allowed his ideas to reach beyond the screen and into homes, churches, and study groups. Religious leaders often leave behind an influence that is measured not by awards but by lives changed. James Robison belonged to that category. He believed in speaking directly, clearly, and with conviction, and those qualities helped him build a large following. His career stretched across decades, which means his influence touched multiple generations. Whether people agreed with his message or not, they knew he stood firmly for what he believed. That kind of consistency is rare, and it becomes part of a legacy long after the public spotlight fades. Kenny Jari, known to many as Patriotic Kenny, showed how social media can still be used for kindness instead of noise. In a digital world often filled with anger and performance, he chose positivity. His messages reached millions because they felt sincere, encouraging, and grounded in simple human decency. He was also a U.S. Navy veteran, which gave his public identity an extra layer of service and discipline. When he was diagnosed with lung cancer, he did not disappear from view. Instead, he continued to offer hope, humor, and gratitude even while facing serious illness. That choice made his influence even more powerful. People often admire public figures when they are strong, but they are deeply moved when those same figures remain generous under pressure. Through the Patriotic Kenny Foundation, he also turned online love into practical help for veterans who needed mobility scooters. That is the difference between popularity and legacy. A popular person gets attention. A legacy leaves something useful behind. Kenny Jari left both emotional inspiration and real-world assistance, which is why many people will remember him with genuine affection. Greg Harmon changed childhood in a way that many parents and children never forget. His role in creating what became Tickle Me Elmo is a perfect example of how an invention can grow into a cultural phenomenon. The toy did not simply sell well. It exploded into public consciousness, creating a frenzy that became one of the defining consumer stories of the 1990s. Behind that success was a creative process full of imagination, adaptation, and a willingness to turn an idea into something the market had never quite seen before. It started as a playful concept, but by the time Elmo entered the picture, the invention had become much bigger than a prototype. Greg's work demonstrates that innovation does not always come from serious-looking inventions. Sometimes it comes from joy, surprise, and a deep understanding of what makes people laugh. For children, Tickle Me Elmo was more than a toy. It was a moment of delight. For parents, it became a holiday headache. For Greg Harmon, it became a lasting place in pop culture history, because very few inventors ever create something that is remembered so fondly and so widely. Barney Frank's career in public life was defined by candor, policy depth, and an unwillingness to hide what he believed. He served in Congress for decades and became one of the most recognizable voices in debates about civil rights, economic regulation, and social justice. His role in the creation of the Dodd-Frank Act secured his place in the history of post-crisis financial reform, but his significance went beyond one law. He was known as a blunt speaker who did not waste words, and that style made him both admired and controversial. One of the most important parts of his legacy was his openness as the first openly gay member of Congress, which carried symbolic power far beyond his own career. In a political world where silence often feels safer, he chose visibility. That mattered. It helped expand what people thought was possible in American public life. His story is also a story of changing eras, from the old barriers of his early career to the broader civil rights conversations that followed. Barney Frank left behind a record of legislation, activism, and political courage that will keep being studied for years. Toto La Momposina was not just a singer, she was a cultural guardian. Through her voice, she carried the rhythms of the Colombian Caribbean and Afro-Colombian tradition onto world stages that might otherwise never have heard them. Known as the Queen of Cumbia, she helped preserve a musical heritage that lives in percussion, dance, community memory, and oral tradition. Her performances were powerful because they were rooted in identity. She sang not as someone borrowing a style, but as someone carrying a living culture. That is why her work felt so authentic and so important. In an era when global music can sometimes flatten local traditions into something generic, Toto reminded audiences that regional music holds its own grandeur. Awards and recognition followed, but her deepest contribution was preservation. She made sure younger listeners could hear the depth and richness of cumbia and bullerengue, not as museum pieces, but as living art. Her career stands as a lesson in cultural continuity. When an artist remains faithful to their roots, they become larger than fame. They become a vessel for memory itself. And then there is the grief that does not belong to one performer, one career, or one audience. The tragedy at the Islamic Center of San Diego took the lives of Amin Abdullah, Mansour Kaziha, and Nader Awad, leaving behind families, friends, and a community struggling to understand such violence. This kind of loss cannot be softened by applause or legacy. It is raw, immediate, and painful. In moments like these, the words "rest in peace" feel too small for the weight of the suffering. What remains is the responsibility to remember them as human beings, not as statistics, not as headlines, but as lives that mattered deeply to the people who knew them. Every tragedy like this leaves an emptiness that spreads far beyond the day it happens. It changes the atmosphere of a community, and it reminds the rest of us how fragile life really is. That is why remembrance matters, because when we speak their names with respect, we refuse to let violence have the final word. The entertainment world has once again fallen into silence. As this week brought the heartbreaking loss of several legendary names whose work touched millions across generations, from iconic musicians and beloved actors to influential public figures and inspiring voices. These are the confirmed celebrity deaths reported this week. Each name carries a legacy, a story, and memories that fans will never forget. Tonight we remember the lives, careers, and unforgettable impact of the stars we lost this week, and honor the memories they leave behind.